This is a recording of Financial Myth-Busting with Don Bennett for Sunday, June 8th, 2014. You can listen to this program live every Sunday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. right here on 105.9 FM and AM 630 WMAL.
Securities offered through Western International Securities Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. The views expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect the views of this station. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.
You're listening to Financial Myth-Busting with Don Bennett.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break.
And this is Don Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting, and welcome. We actually have a full day today. We're going to be talking at the bottom of the hour with Amity Shlaes, and she's going to be giving us lessons about the lost lessons of the Great Depression. She's actually the chairman of the Coolidge Foundation, and she's got a #1 New York Times bestseller, The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression. So she is going to be at the bottom of the hour. You're going to want to stay tuned to that. And again, if you have any questions regarding your portfolio or anything that went on this week financially, I'd be happy to chat with you about it. You can give me a call here at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296, or you can actually still ask us questions on Facebook or Twitter, or you can become a fan of Financial Myth-Busting on Facebook, and all you need to do is like us there at Financial Myth-Busting or follow us on Twitter at Don Bennett FMB on Twitter. And, of course, there is still the old-fashioned way to contact us, which is BennettGroupFinancial.com. Go there and just click on the Contact Us in the upper right-hand corner of the page, and we will answer any question that you have during this show. And if we can't get to you, we will get to an up-and-coming show. And if I can't even get to you there, I will actually give you a call. So make sure that you put your telephone number in there. You know, before I get started on what I saw this week in the marketplace, one of the things that actually really did pop out for me was when the U.S. government on Friday actually announced that we have now created enough jobs to bring the economy back to where it was before the recession. And they presented this everywhere as great news. The only thing is they didn't present the other half of the news. And the bad news is that over the same time period, 12.8 million Americans actually dropped out of the labor force, which brings that number up to a record 92 million Americans out of work. So Saturday morning, front page news, the LA Times, and this is their front page news title, U.S. economy has recovered 8.7 million jobs lost in Great Recession. And then it goes on to talk about all the good stuff. If it really is good stuff, but unless you have the other part of the formula, then it's not true. And then CNN did the same thing. U.S. soon to recover all jobs lost in crisis. The Washington Post. The economy recovers jobs lost in recession. I mean, this is crazy. The New York Times, private jobs recovered. So I'm asking you this. If all these front page headlines of employment today is true, then why aren't I happier? Or how about you? Are you happier? Give me a call at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's DAWN. And again, it's 1-855-884-3296. Does this feel like a job recovery to you? Are we back on track, or are we simply just treading water? Is this a new normal? Again, I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. I want to hear from you. And while I'm waiting for your calls, I'm going to talk about what I saw this week and in the marketplace. And, you know, it reminded me of a George Orwell quote where he said, "The further society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." Now, humans have a natural tendency to ignore obvious warning signs, which is typical, and it's at their own peril, and normally take the path of least resistance in many things in life. As human beings, more often than not, we stick our heads in the sand rather than have to acknowledge uncomfortable truths and risks. It's really odd, but we actually turn a blind eye in order to feel safe, to reduce anxiety, and mostly to protect ourselves. I've seen this over and over again. So instead of staying in touch with true facts, and in our particular case in my industry, you know, real, true investment strategies that could protect your family and your livelihood, we close our eyes because we feel threatened. You know, when I was coming into the studio this morning, I remembered one of the first times I encountered this massive negative event on Wall Street regarding turning a blind eye towards ruined, destroyed investors. And it was during the trial of Ken Lay. Remember, he was the CEO and chairman of Enron. The judge in this case, Judge Simeon Lake, when he was giving instruction to the jury, said, quote, "You may find that a defendant had knowledge of a fact if you find that the defendant deliberately closed his eyes to what would otherwise have been obvious to him. Knowledge can be inferred if the defendant deliberately blinded himself to the existence of a fact." Unquote. So in this instance, the judge was actually saying you're responsible if you could have known and should have known something which instead you strove not to see. I think the legal term for this is called blindful or willful blindness. It's turning a blind eye to the truth in our daily lives or even in the boardrooms of the companies or anywhere for that matter. It struck me that there's absolutely no shortage of material to prove it surrounds us, and I know you're thinking it surrounds you every day. But you see, I'm a wealth manager and I'm a money manager. In the past 3 years, my curiosity about this human phenomenon relating to investors in the markets has grown stronger because time and time again I've seen investors believe and therefore act like being blind makes them feel safer, when in fact it actually is leaving their portfolios crippled, vulnerable, and powerless. So after 30 years as a money manager, I can defiantly tell you, and without equivocation, that every time an investor confronts the truth surrounding their portfolio, they always achieve real power and unleash their portfolio's capacity to grow during both thick and thin times, which is why I'm going to ask you this question today. Do you have a plan B for your portfolio? Do you have a more defensive approach to managing your money? Because this is not a ramifications-free U.S. stock market. It is full, and I mean chock full of consequences. And know this, smart investors always have a plan B for their portfolio. Big investors always have a plan B for their portfolio. So, by the way, I'm just going to let you know one of the many steps that we take at Bennett Group Financial every day in order to keep our clients' portfolio ahead is this process of staying in tune with the truth. You know, again, we do this every day, every week, every month, this investment process, and because it benefits our clients every single time, we stick to this discipline. So I'm going to actually bring you deeper into what we did this past week in regards to that discipline. And I want to share with you one of the things we picked up on as one of the most uncomfortable truths and risks. And I also think we should acknowledge it. We did for our clients, but I want you to acknowledge it for the sake of your own portfolio. So here it is. Despite a string of negative corporate and economic news last week, and there was a lot, the S&P 500 continued to move up, and with that, something called the VIX. This is the VIX. Now, that's a CBOE volatility index. It's also known as a fear gauge, and it closed below 11 for the first time since February 2007. Now, closing lower on the VIX is supposed to mean less fear. Yet to money managers, a VIX heading into single digits is a sign of trouble ahead because historically, most low volatility periods come near the end of a bull market. And this VIX that we're looking at, that closed down on Friday, below 11, it's been stuck below 14 for 30 consecutive days now, and this is the longest time period for the market's fear gauge since November 2013, which is what I call the lull before the volatility storm. So, to my mind, investors should prepare for more volatility this year because the Fed is still in its goal of reducing quantitative easing, monthly asset purchases, by another $10 billion. And again, this is going to happen June 17th and 18th in the meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. This means we're getting closer to the tightening of the Fed's balance sheet, which, if according to Yellen's past commentary, will be October of 2014. Now, this is why I see significant potential for tremendous volatility and setbacks on financial markets over the next few quarters. So just remember one thing. When you own the truth to protect your investment portfolio, you will win. And again, one of the truths, it came out last week, is when you have tightening of the U.S. monetary policy, you will always cause fallout, and this time will be no different. So do not think it's going to be different for you. And actually, it may end up being worse, since we have never, and I mean ever, seen this much expansion done on any country's balance sheet at any time in the history of the world. So, let me just bottom line our thoughts. Again, our being always honest and in tune with the truth. You need to have a plan B for your portfolio because every lesson doesn't have to be hard-learned and slow-learned lesson. You can actually get ahead of this. So again, we talk about staying in tune with the truth, and part of it is actually having to filter through what I read to you earlier, which is this front page news that really isn't telling you the whole truth. They give you a piece of it. And something's just wrong about that. it is wrong. I mean, the big media spin that happened on Friday is supposedly the economy has finally recovered the number of jobs that has been lost since 2007. Even if that were true, if you look at the labor force participation rate, it's at 62.8%. Now, the last time we observed a level like that was in 1978, which is when most households still had one worker families. Now, since 2007, 12.8 million people have disappeared from the labor force, retired, disability insurance, student loans, stopped looking for a job, welfare. If you factor in population growth, getting back to the jobs lost since 2007 is I don't know, it's going to be very difficult, and we certainly haven't done it. So the headlines didn't tell the whole story. And I know that's what you're up against all the time. I actually feel so bad for you, but it is your job to learn to filter this. And most of those jobs are lower paying, temporary, statistically created by government birth-death models that they're talking about. So it really is not pertaining to you. So let me ask you this question. Why doesn't the government tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? I want to hear from you. I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And how about this? Is the government turning a blind eye to the truth because they are afraid? Just like investors do for their portfolio. They do. They turn a blind eye. I meet with them all the time, and they just think they're invincible. And even if a correction comes, just because they feel so good for that moment, they aren't situated for the future. I mean, the U.S. economic growth ground to almost half in the first quarter of this year, and then later it was revised down to negative. And we're actually having headlines in the United States that everything's better. You know, maybe the U.S. government, Congress, Senate, and the White House are just oblivious to the truth, or are they turning a blind eye to the truth because they are afraid and don't have an answer? Give me a call at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. I mean, do you see a joblessness, or do you see joblessness actually as a personal crisis? I mean, what happens to America's long-term unemployed? I mean, these are questions we've never even have to face, and the last time they faced them was actually during the Great Depression. I mean, 3 Princeton economists found that only 11% of the long-term unemployed in the United States in any given month find full-time work a year. Actually, 3 only find full-time work a year. Is that crazy? That is absolutely nuts, and that's the world we're living in. But again, our headlines are telling us differently. I want to hear from you. I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's DAWN. Again, that's 1-855-884-3296. And if you are unemployed right now, I definitely want you to call in. I mean, what's your experience been like? I'm wondering if it's similar to what the people felt like during the Great Depression. I mean, if you're underemployed, what has your experience been like in that? You know, the United States government is trying to spin this past Friday's job report as indicative of an ongoing recovery. But it's not. I mean, emphasizing that as of May, all the jobs were lost since December 2007 have been now recovered. It's just ridiculous. Our government has failed to mention that it took the Fed, $2.7 trillion in incremental liquidity to regain all the lost jobs, and at the same time, the U.S. population grew by 14.8 million since December 2007. So now a record 12.8 million people from the labor force lost their jobs, which remains, again, an all-time high of 92 million Americans out of work. 92 million Americans are out of work. So I'm saying to you, do not buy into the front page news that's coming out this weekend, or even that came out on Saturday, or even on Friday when they announced it, because it's not the full truth. And it's important that you deal with the full truth, because then you have an opportunity to really protect yourself. Again, I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And as we go into break, I'm going to remind all of you that you need to stay tuned for the bottom of the hour when we have Amity here, because she's going to be talking about her New York bestseller book about the Depression and the similarities she's seeing today, as well as I'm going to continue to ask you to call in and tell me about what you think unemployment is like here in the United States. This is Dawn Bennett with Financial Myth Busting, and we'll be right back.
105.9 FM and AM 630 WMAL. This is Financial Myth-Busting with Dawn Bennett.
The U.S. government is trying to spin this past Friday's jobs report as indicative of an ongoing recovery, and I actually find that sad. I mean, is this the best that they can do for us? And I'm wondering, is this the new normal? I do want to hear from you. I'm just wondering, why are there no jobs out there? I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And I've got Joe from Fairfax, Virginia. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Good, Don. Great show. Love to listen to you. I listen to you on Sunday morning on my way to one of the 3 jobs I have, thanks to the Obama administration. And I was at an investment meeting this week, and they were spouting those erroneous low unemployment numbers, and I actually called them on it and told them that is not honest and not true. And in fact, when you look at the 200,000 or so people that were employed, they really weren't of the kind of jobs that we had seen in the past. So I feel sometimes like we're screaming in the wilderness, and there's only a few people. Thank God you and a few other folks are on the radio trying to tell people to wake up and listen to the truth, because if we don't do this and let everybody know, and I even tell my kids that are in college, you need to wake up and listen to everything that's going on, and don't believe what you read in the papers. Do your own research and look at all sides of the coin.
And be your own filter. I mean, there's a lot of good reporters out there, and those that actually present the whole story are the ones that win awards. Those that just present a piece of it don't. And even in my own industry, there are a lot of good advisors out there that know the truth. But, you know, again, a lot don't. And that's what happened at your investment thing. They don't dig deeper. And you remember, our industry is more about sales as it is about knowledge. And I argue it needs to be the other way around. You need to have the research and the knowledge, and that's what makes the best financial advisor out there. But again, I want to thank you so much for calling in, Joe, and best of luck with your 3 jobs. I hope you're taking good care of yourself.
I am. Thanks a lot, Don.
All right.
Great show.
Take care. I've got James from North Bethesda. Hi, how are you?
Good, Don. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for calling in.
Yes, thank you. Interesting discussion. One of the things that I wanted to bring forth is I do a lot of data analysis. But basically what you're getting from this administration and the government are descriptive analysis. In other words, counts and percentages and so forth and so on. And they'll take a dot at a low value and say that the dot has increased over time to a higher value.
Yeah.
But what they don't look in is the actual what's going on in between.
Right.
So as an educated person, and like yourself and hopefully others out there, we need to go to the next step, which is exploratory analysis, where we go and we say, how valid is the data? And when we start looking at that, we see that the data is disguised, misrepresented, not completely given to us.
Yeah.
And the next step is we make inferential, and we say, okay, we make our own inferences.
But let me ask you something, James. Do you think it's intentional on the part of the United States government, or do you think they just don't know any better? I actually think it's B. They don't know any better. They honestly do not have the experience or knowledge to even ask the right questions to know better, so they honestly think that they're giving out all the information that should be given out. Or do you think it's intentional that they're holding back?
I think from the government non-political component of it, they don't have the expertise. Everything that you can find, I can't go into detail about that because it's an area that I work in. And to try and educate them to use a higher level of data analysis is difficult because they're not required to. So they live within these sort of percentages and blah, 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 and they don't go to the next level.
Is it also because they don't have the experience either? I mean, there's a lot of young people in the government, they think they know everything because they graduated from college, but they don't have the day-to-day experience or the years and years of experience, economic experience.
Well, I think that's one component of it, but I think but it's like the government is always about the lowest cost, minimal standard.
Right.
It's not about going to the next level, which you see in private industry, because they're not concerned about risk management. You know, they're going to survive whether they give bad numbers or good numbers or in-between numbers. The rest of us are more dependent on what that risk is in terms of what we do with that information. And on the other side, when you look at the sort of administration or the elected sort of thing, I think they purposely do disguise that to highlight what they want to highlight. And we see this not only in the numbers.
For political reasons, yeah.
Political reasons. We see this with the Benghazi and the Fast and Furious and all the other different little scandals that are occurring.
Yeah, or they just don't know any better. I'm still going to keep going back to that. I can't imagine that all these people in our government, even in the White House, are intentionally trying to mislead. And I mean this seriously. I just don't think they know any better. And that's not, the end result isn't any better, but I think that's the problem. James, I'm going to thank you so much for calling in. Again, to everybody, we're going to go into break, but when we get back, we're going to have Amity Shlaes here, and she's going to be talking about the depression that was and maybe the one we're heading into. This is Dawn Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting. Until then.
105.9 FM and AM 630 WMAL. This is Financial Myth-Busting with Dawn Bennett.
Amity Shlaes is here. Amity is the chairwoman of the Coolidge Foundation, a foundation devoted to advancing the ideals of the 30th President, Calvin Coolidge. She is also an author and columnist who writes about politics and economics at Forbes magazine, the Financial Times, and Bloomberg. Amity also directs the Bush Center's 4% Growth Project, which is a belief that if the economy grew at 4% per year, we would create 10 million additional jobs during the next decade, returning the economy to full employment through growth alone, with no rise in government spending. And yes, that would be a dream, because instead we're heading in the other direction, and Amity is the perfect person to discuss this with, because she is also a New York Times bestselling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, which is where I want to start today. Amity, welcome to Financial Myth-Busting.
Thank you.
So I just heard your new illustrated edition of your #1 New York Times book, The Forgotten Man, is now a bestseller as well. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, and congratulations to the artist, because this is a giant endeavor. It's a drawing of economic history by a very talented graphic artist named Paul Rivoche, who lives in Canada. You know, we all write all the time. This is a new medium for serious material. It's called the graphic novel. That sounds like fiction. It's not really fiction. We're talking about just rendering through cartoons what happened. In my case, this would be what happened in the 1930s, the Great Depression. And boy, are his pictures beautiful, but it was just a real kick to see a serious book about economics for younger people, right up there with X-Men and Saga and all the books that are unusual.
Because it does have a feel like a Marvel comic book because of these black and white illustrations. I mean, I think it really, truly captures the dark period in American history and the men and women whose tough American character actually helped them to persevere. So I do have to ask you, why do you think this book is resonating now?
Well, I think, number one, people don't know about the past, and anyone who's a parent or an educator, and a lot of your listeners are, or a young person knows that the past is farther away than it was 10 years ago. By which I mean people 10 years ago knew who Franklin Roosevelt was. Right. More people knew what the Great Depression was, basic stuff, what World War I or World War II was.
Sure.
People today are intelligent, but history isn't taught very well, and things keep happening now. So I think it's resonating because people know that maybe they should know what happened in the 30s. History doesn't always repeat itself, but sometimes we say it rhymes. That is, or we get a repeat first. First we get the tragedy, then we get the farce. So you at least want to know what happened. And in the financial world, this is especially true. One of the gratifying things about this original book, The Forgotten Man, which was published even before the financial crisis and has been popular since, is the hedge fund managers who have come to me and said, I thought I could make my career be all about my math genius, but I need to know, I've discovered now, actually what happened so that I can set policy for my fund.
Yeah.
Sometimes knowing about history helps you make money.
Right. But, they're absolutely right about that, because in The Forgotten Man, your first book, right, you wrote about the Depression within the Depression. And that's the first time I've actually heard that, and especially during the years of 1937 and 38. So I'm wondering, are you seeing any rhyming, right, of that or similarities of that here in 2013 and 2014?
Well, thank you for that question, too. We're all very concerned about the quality of the recovery. Some of the data are getting back now. Some people in some sectors, particularly government and energy, are feeling great. States with those components, Washington, D.C. with government, Texas with energy, the Dakotas, especially North Dakota with energy, they're feeling great, but the rest of the country isn't, and we're all concerned about youth unemployment and sort of the general cynical feeling of young people looking at limited opportunities that they confront. So that is like the later 30s, and when I went back first to look at the Great Depression, what made it great? Well, what made it great was that it was so long.
Yeah.
It was 10 years of double-digit unemployment, high double digits sometimes. So especially the latter 30s, when you kind of thought, looking at the data and the mood, everything would get all better. It didn't. Instead, we had a depression within the depression. And I don't think you can call what we have now a depression by any means, but the absence of strong recovery is puzzling, and a concern also that our markets are overpriced. Interest rates now are lower than they were in 1928 or 27, which is what people look back and say, well, there was a lot of champagne, a lot of Great Gatsby, and interest rates were so low, and that caused the crash of 29. But you want to look at those interest rates that preceded the crash of 29, and they were higher than our own.
So during the Depression, you had said that the phrase, nice work if you can get it, lived during that decade. Now today, 92 million Americans are out of work. So what would be the phrase you think for this time period?
Nice work if you can get it again. We have the paradox whereby if you have a job, you might be doing well, but next door the person cannot get a job. There's a sort of locked out feeling, or they can only get a temp job. Think of people who have a union job that's grandfathered, they're 58 years old, they have a pension, at least promise them. The younger union members, not to speak of the non-union members, don't get anything like the benefits that the people born before 1960, say, get. So it's a divide, and it's a wrong divide, and it has to do with rigidities in the labor market, just like prison walls, that are caused by regulations.
Yeah.
So we don't want to be a disappointing place for our young people, and what can we do to fix that? There you are in Washington. I'm very, very concerned, as much as about economics, with this sort of cronyism that, where you went to school, who you know, which department knows which department,
right.
Which department cut a deal with another department, that's who gets a good deal and everyone else is cut out. The book is called The Forgotten Man because it's about this great philosopher who said, we remember one poor person, maybe the homeless man, but we forget another forgotten man. That's the man who pays for the project for the homeless person. He's the forgotten man. The taxpayer might be. And I loved this idea, which comes from William Graham Sumner, the forgotten taxpayer or bystander who doesn't get the financial aid, the special mortgage for that group, and who is yet subsidizing help for others.
As chairwoman of the Coolidge Foundation, what have you learned from Calvin Coolidge about the way we should respond to our economic crisis today, our unemployment issues today?
Well, thank you for asking that. Coolidge was a great president. That's why we at the Coolidge Foundation love him, and we want to invite everyone to come up to his birthplace, Plymouth Notch, Vermont, this summer, and judge debaters. It's our own Williamsburg. It's our own Monticello, for a president who believed in saving money because interest rates might one day go up.
Right.
And we were just looking, so that's what I learned from Coolidge. I'm his biographer, which is how I got the job of working for the foundation with some wonderful colleagues. And what we do up there is entertain people, along with the state of Vermont, the host, who want to get to know a president who believed you have to cut budgets. You can't just reduce the increase. In certain ways, Coolidge is better than Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
He actually cut the budget. His top marginal tax rate, I'm just thinking about that, and I know you have some listeners who followed Reagan. Coolidge's top marginal rate was 25. Reagan only got the top marginal rate down to 28.
Wow.
So he's a great hero, and right now you're like, oh, we don't need him. Interest rates are low. Maybe we can grow out of this. We all know we can't quite grow out of everything, right, the United States, because our entitlements are so great. So Coolidge is the hero of the hour. When you feel a bit of tension about the interest rates, look to him. I want to correct one thing. I'm sorry. I did work and very happily with the Bush Center, but now I'm doing this wonderful Coolidge thing
okay.
full time.
All right, good. Well, I love both programs. Let me ask you, President Obama has been quoted to the effect of the Depression lasted as long as it did because FDR didn't act even more boldly. So do you think insufficient interventionism was the problem, or is our problem?
Oh, I do not, and not only do I not do, but there's plenty of evidence that they intervene too much. President Obama is speaking of stimulus, and it's true, their stimuli were not as great as ours. The New Deal, as radical as it was, did not stimulate, i.e. spend in terms of the economy as much as we do when we spend. That's what he was talking about. He's probably wrong. What is the evidence? There's enormous evidence that the arbitrary nature of the intervention terrified markets.
Right.
And that's hard to quantify, though now we're beginning to learn how to do that. When a government is truly arbitrary, and I know the head of the Chamber of Commerce gave a speech about this a couple of years ago, then markets freeze, or they freeze in some areas, or they're cautious. You think your business, you don't know what's going to be the outcome with the health care, so maybe you're going to hire less or borrow less for 6 months or a year. Maybe you think, and so on. So that was the part of Roosevelt that slowed the economy. He basically said, I'm going to take over all the private economy if I feel like it on some days. He was extremely inconsistent, President Roosevelt. He had a bunch of competing impulses in his brain and breast, as we all do, and one was save money, and another, though, was bust in. And so the economy froze up, and it's especially those last 5 years of the 1930s, and the artist draws this so beautifully in this cartoon book, that are an opportunity squandered, because we probably could have recovered by 35 or 36, and we didn't because the government was so terrifying.
So fast forward today, is President Obama suffering from some of the things that FDR did?
Yes, and I'd say a lot of us do. It's a legal approach. Mm-hmm. I'm going to write law, and that will bring recovery.
Yeah.
I'm nice and fair and make the society a better place with projects that probably aren't related to the economic problems, and that will bring recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare, or in Roosevelt's case, there were all kinds of social interventions. I'm a good person, the progressive impulse, and probably better than the private sector. What's interesting is John Maynard Keynes, whom conservatives often vilify, was a wise man here, and we drew pictures of Keynes sending counsel to President Roosevelt, and he said Roosevelt was he was sort of prosecuting the utilities to death, and Keynes said, well, why not, you can nationalize those utilities, or you can leave them alone, but there's no use chasing them around the lot every other week. That is, regulating them like crazy when you feel like it, because you're hurting utilities. And Keynes said to Roosevelt, businessmen aren't wild beasts, that is, enemies you have to slay with your sword. They are more like domestic animals. You have to treat them pretty okay, and then they'll treat you pretty okay. This is very interesting that at the time, and none of our children learns this in their books, Keynes understood the failings of Roosevelt and articulated them.
And do you see, again, those same failings today?
Oh, totally. It's an arrogance of power, and I would say it's a legal arrogance. You can see it in Republicans too, though. I do not want to be partisan in this. It's the general the progressive impulse came from the Republicans in the beginning, as the listeners will recall. Theodore Roosevelt was not a Democrat, the cousin of President Franklin, and he was a progressive. So all this history. It's not quite on the SAT 2, that subject test that some children, juniors and seniors, took this weekend or next weekend. It's not all quite conveyed in our history books for kids, and it's our job to get our kids, our investors, this knowledge. And I'm really hoping that we get this cartoon book, which is a big fat book, not a light one, but with life stories, translated into Spanish, because Forgotten Man has so many Spanish readers, and they want to share it with their children who might not want to read.
Amity, I've got one more minute. I want to ask you one more question. The President Obama largely credits himself with having saved the economy from the worst recession since the Great Depression, to use his oft-stated line. As an economic historian, how do you rate this kind of argument, and will it be validated?
Well, personally, I don't think it was. This is my own personal analysis. No, President Obama did not save the economy. Even Chairman Bernanke certainly, in fact, did not save the economy. All things being equal, the U.S. economy will recover. The real question is, why did it take so long? And their probably larger government is to blame.
Are you optimistic about America's future?
I always am, because all things being equal, we like to grow.
Right.
But we have to learn the lessons from ourselves. What is it that's happening in Texas that we could replicate? Well, start with the no income tax.
Right. The Forgotten Man, graphic edition. It's a new history of the Great Depression. It's at Amazon. Go and get it. I did. It's a great book. And Amity, I want to thank you so much for being on Financial Mythbusting.
Oh, this is a fun show. Thank you. I hope to see some of you in Vermont this summer. Bring your children to see the president who saved money and was polite.
Now, do you have a website for that?
We do. We have two. We have calvin-coolidge.org, which is more archival, and we have a new one with, you can follow our blast, coolidgefoundation.org, and you can also contribute to our blast. Send us notes if you know something about Coolidge, you want us to say something about Coolidge. Coolidge is everyone's president, and he's not well known yet.
That was Amity Shlaes. Thank you so much for being on Financial Myth-Busting. And this is Dawn Bennett. When we get back, we're going to be talking about how Western banks are scrambling as China's rehypothecation of commodities is going global, just like we've been talking all these years.
WMAL-FM Woodbridge, Washington. WMAL Washington. WRQX HD2, Washington.
This is Financial Myth-Busting with Dawn Bennett.
So Western banks now are scrambling because China's rehypothecation of commodities is actually going global. And I've been talking about this and their use of commodities in Asia and the emerging market countries, and China's going to be the first one. But in particular, I've warned about the problem of rehypothecation of physical funding commodities, metals, be it gold or silver or copper or anything metal-based, many, many times in the past. And it was actually only this past week that China actually finally admitted it has a major problem involving not just the commodities participating in the funding deals, but specifically their infinite rehypothecation. So just to remind everybody, rehypothecation is the practice by banks and brokers of using assets that have been posted as collateral by their clients. And in this case, the collateral is commodities. But China's problem with this, at least now, is with copper and aluminum. And you can see it's appearing that my fear of global contagion is actually now coming true. And it was even reported in the Wall Street Journal this past week. So as I've discussed before, if the banks become more cautious to allow their precious metal holdings to be used as collateral for loans, then we just might be heading into some type of watershed event. And again, you've got to pay attention to everything going on in the world because it is sharing you the truths of how you need to be managing your own portfolio. And also the fact that you probably do need to have gold and silver in your portfolios or maybe even at home. And remember, we do sell that at Bennett Group if you're interested. And if you are, give us a call at 866-286-2268. And also, we do talk a lot about Plan B with all of our clients because I think you have to prepare for the unknown. I also think you have to prepare for an unwinding of a quantitative easing balance sheet that no one's ever seen this kind of size before. And since it really hasn't helped employment, it hasn't helped inflation, it hasn't helped our GDP, all the stimulus that, what's going to happen when they unwind it. And that's the type of thing we are trying to prepare all of our clients for at Bennett Group. So if you're interested in giving us a call to do a review of your portfolio, just give us a call at 866-286-2268. And again, that's 866-286-2268, the same number for purchasing gold and silver coins or gold and silver bars or even setting up your IRA with gold and silver coins and or bars. So, we are in a very, what I call, environment with a lot of ramifications and an environment where we haven't seen a lot of this, what's going on. And, for people like the caller who called in, who has 3 jobs now just to kind of piece his living together, that's not an unusual story. We aren't having that kind of recovery, and the Dow and the S&P keep running up on no volume. And all that, when you combine it together, is not a happy story. It's actually setting you up for failure if you're buying into it. So again, if you've got any questions regarding your portfolio, give us a call at 866-286-2268. We've been managing money for over 30 years, and we are very research-based. No motion, no sales. It's all about research. Again, 866-286-2268. And you know what? That's all I've got. This is Dawn Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting, where politics and the economy intersect.